So in my video on the 2021 NASCAR schedule, I mentioned the 2005 F1 debacle at Indianapolis. And so I thought I'd make a video on that today, since today was supposed to be the 2020 United States Grand Prix at Circuit of the Americas. The gameplay was recorded using the Formula A car on Project Cars 2. Project Cars 2, however, does not have the exact same layout that F1 used. On Project Cars 2, Turn 6 turns into a small chicane after Turn 5, which was not built yet, and then at the end of the lap, it uses the MotoGP section rather than Turn 1 of the oval, which also was not built yet. In 1999, Indianapolis built an infield road course in the hopes of attracting Formula One and bring it back to the United States for the first time since 1991, when it took place on the streets of Phoenix. Indy's plan worked, and in 2000, the United States Grand Prix made its return to Formula One, taking place on the brand new 13-turn, 2.606-mile Indianapolis infield road course. The road course was designed to be run clockwise as opposed to the oval, which was run counterclockwise. The race went on without much of an issue until 2005. In 2004, the oval track was repaved following the conclusion of the NASCAR Brickyard 400 in August. The infield section was not repaved. As part of the track resurfacing, the track was diamond grinded. On Friday practice, Ralph Schumacher had a tire failure at the flat-out banked turn 13 and hit the outside wall hard. This would ultimately sideline him from the race. For those unfamiliar with the Indy road course, turn 13 is turn 1 on the oval and has 9 degrees of banking to it. He was replaced by Toyota reserve driver Ricardo Zonta, who was also taking place in the session in a third Toyota. Zonta also suffered a similar failure at turn 13. Thankfully, that part of the track features a safer barrier to help absorb the impact. Indy was the only F1 track to have safer barriers. An additional 9 tires were deemed to have failed by Michelin, but these tires had not yet reached the point of exploding. Toyota was one of 7 teams using Michelin tires. Those teams were Toyota, McLaren, BAR Honda, Renault, Williams, Sauber, and Red Bull. Ferrari, Jordan, and Minardi used Bridgestone tires. After 2 tire failures in the same corner in the same session, Michelin started to investigate the issue. They found that with the speed of the cars and the loads that the tires were taking, the tires would only be guaranteed for 10 laps. There were 2 things at play that resulted in this. Like I said, the track was repaved, and as part of the repave, the track was diamond grinded. Diamond grinding smooths out pavement by cutting grooves into the track. These grooves cause extra strain on the tires and the banking in turn 13. The diamond grinding was done to help give Indy cars more grip, but F1 cars have much more downforce, and the result was it was creating much more heat on the F1 tires. Turn 13 at Indy was the only banked turn in the whole F1 season. Additionally, a new rule was introduced for 2005 that required teams to qualify and run the whole race on the same tire. Being that all F1 teams were based in Europe, Indy was not a part of the tracks for testing. Ultimately, Michelin failed to take into account new track surfaces with the tires they brought. Now, you may be saying, hey, what about Bridgestone? Well, here's what happened with Bridgestone. Bridgestone uses their US brand Firestone to supply tires to IndyCar, and so Firestone did an IndyCar test, and they had the Indy 500 there. And so Bridgestone was able to use that data to better predict the track conditions. Michelin flew in tires used in the Spanish Grand Prix, but were of a similar construction and thus suffered similar results. Michelin stated to the FIA race director, Charlie Whiting, that unless the cars were slowed in turn 13, the tires would only be guaranteed to last for 10 laps. Whiting replied with blaming Michelin for not supplying the proper tire and that they should limit the speed of their cars through the final turn. Whiting also shot down any option of using additional tires flown in, as that would be considered a breach of 5 different rules. Whiting also rejected the proposal of adding a chicane as it had not been tested and was thus deemed unsafe. Whiting stated that if the track layout was altered, the FIA would withdraw from the race and it could not be considered part of the championship. Whiting also noted that the use of a chicane would be, quote, grossly unfair to the Bridgestone teams, end quote. Michelin replied to Whiting stating that they refused to let their teams race unless the changes to the track were made. Whiting's response was that the teams could choose to limit their speeds through turn 13 or make constant tire changes, as tire changes were only permitted if the driver's safety was at risk. It wasn't logistically possible to get that many tires there in that little of a time, so this idea was rejected. The morning of the race, a meeting between the team principals, minus Ferrari because Jean Todt, who reportedly failed to show up, Michelin representatives, IMS team president Tony George, and Formula One CEO Bernie Ecclestone took place. They rejected the FIA's proposal of teams limiting speed through turn 13 as unsafe because of the possibility of wrecks between two cars and the danger of having cars traveling through the same corner at drastically different speeds. They also dismissed the idea of pit stops every 10 laps. They requested the Bridgestone teams allow the installation of a chicane in turn 13. They even agreed to let the Bridgestone teams start at the front and that the Michelin teams wouldn't be allowed to score points. 9 of the 10 teams were reportedly agreed on this idea and seemed to be working hard to try and find a solution that could see the best race possible for their sponsors and for fans. And so they all, minus Ferrari, who wasn't present, agreed that the best solution was a chicane and requested the creation of a plan for a chicane to be added by the track prior to turn 13. Ecclestone offered to consult Todd. Jean Todt denies ever being consulted, but stated that he would have turned down the idea of a chicane as it was an FIA and Michelin problem, not his. Ironically, Jean Todt is now the president of the FIA. Then FIA President Max Mosley stated that if plans were made to go ahead with the race with an altered track, that he would cancel the Grand Prix. Everyone agreed that the best solution that could be found was to install the chicane in turn 13 and run the race as a non-championship race without the support and governance of the FIA. They began to appoint people to take on the roles of the FIA staff. The meeting was then continued with all the drivers present, and they presented their plan to the drivers. Max Mosley reportedly continued to reject all solutions and said that if the race went forward without the FIA, they would be putting not just the future of the U.S. Grand Prix in jeopardy, but all FIA-sanctioned U.S. motorsports. The FIA has denied such a threat was ever made. Ultimately, the Michelin teams decided that if no solution could be reached, that they would not take part in the race in the best interest of the sport. Paul Stoddard, team president for Minardi, was in support of the Michelin teams and was planning on not racing despite the guarantee of much-needed points from the smaller field. He then said he had no choice but to race after he claims Jordan backed out of the agreement not to race. He was asked how he felt during the race about getting a nice points day and said, quote, "I don't care." 125,000 plus fans came to Indianapolis to watch the United States Grand Prix and had no knowledge of what was unfolding in the garage area. As race time approached, all 20 cars formed up on the grid and the green light went on for the formation lap and all cars took off from the grid as usual. As they came out of turn 12, all 14 Michelin cars entered the pits and retired their cars. The 6 drivers that started the race were Michael Schumacher and Rubens Barrichello in the Ferraris, Thiago Montero and Narayan Karthikeyan in the Jordans, and Christian Albers and Patrick Friesacker in the Minardis. Bernie Ecclestone, in an interview with Martin Brundle, stated that the future of Formula One in the United States and Michelin's future in F1 as, quote, not good, and also, quote, not the fault of the teams, to be honest with you. Martin Brundle had this to say during the race, quote, "I don't know what it says about the 6 teams that have elected to run, to be honest. They should have joined up and found a solution too. I think they're probably just as guilty of doing the wrong thing as the guys in the pits in many respects because they failed to help a solution be found," end quote. Fans proceeded to throw bottles and cans onto the track and boo and chant refund. The only celebration on the podium was from Jordan's Thiago Montero, and this was his first ever F1 podium. Ferrari accepted their awards and quickly left. Paul Stoddard of Minardi was very outspoken after the race and blamed Jordan and said all but Ferrari had agreed not to race and that had Jordan not decided to race, Minardi would have also boycotted the race. He also blamed Michelin for not bringing a proper tire, but ultimately put the blame on Max Mosley and the FIA for the failure to reach a solution, and also blamed Gene Todd for getting in the way of a solution and demanded Max Mosley resign as president of the FIA. The FIA issued a statement on its position and said that it had clear rules and that had a chicane been constructed, it would have significantly altered the track, quote, without following any modern safety procedures, end quote. The FIA claimed this would have exposed them to significant legal liability. On June 22nd, the FIA charged the 7 Michelin teams in front of the World Motorsport Council with violating Article 151C of the International Sporting Code as, quote, acts prejudicial to the interest of competition or motorsports generally, end quote. They were found guilty of not being in possession of suitable racing tires, but with, quote, strong mitigating circumstances. The punishment was not decided at this time. However, on July 22nd, the World Motorsports Council voted to overturn their guilty verdict, as it was discovered that had the teams raced, they would have been subject to criminal charges under Indiana state law for knowingly putting others at risk, even if a wreck didn't happen. Christian Horner, team principal of Red Bull, stated that while pulling out of the race was incredibly difficult, there were things bigger than the sport that day. Michelin offered compensation to all race fans in attendance and would do so through the IMS ticket office. Additionally, Michelin gave away 20,000 tickets to the 2006 United States Grand Prix to people who attended in 2005. There was discussion amongst the teams and Bernie Ecclestone for a second non-championship race to be held at Indy after the conclusion of the season, but this idea was dismissed by IMS track president Tony George. The race returned in 2006 with no major incidents, and again in 2007 for the final race of the contract. F1 failed to renew the contract with IMS, and F1 would once again leave the US market. Michelin would also leave F1 after 2006. F1 would not return to the United States market until 2012, when Circuit of the Americas was built for F1. I've said this before in another video, F1 has been struggling to really get a strong hold on the US market, and 2005 was another blow for F1. The United States market is important for F1 because a lot of companies that participate in F1 and sponsors of F1 are largely involved in the United States, and they're missing out on marketing opportunities. And the United States is a huge market, and a good number of these companies and sponsors are United States companies too. Ultimately, I think everyone deserves some blame in this situation. Michelin failed to bring the proper tire, but they didn't have any information to really guide them, and just kind of had to guess. The teams in the FIA failed to work together to find a reasonable solution. Since Roger Penske bought the track, he has been hoping to get an F1 return to the Brickyard. So now you've heard from me, and now I want to hear from you. So drop a comment with who you think was at fault and what should have been done. Thanks for watching, and until next time, so long, everybody.